Tucked away in a quiet, tree-lined corner of Lucerne, Switzerland, sits an enormous carving in a cliffside. The sheer scale of this resting beast is striking, stretching 10 meters across a serene reflecting pool. The American author Mark Twain once visited this spot and called it the most mournful and moving piece of stone in the world. But the quiet dignity of this carving masks the violent reason it exists. It marks the endpoint of an explosive political clash that happened hundreds of miles away. The reason this lion is dying can only be found roughly 300 miles away, winding the clock back to 1789. In France, the absolute monarchy was buckling under crushing economic pressure and widespread starvation. King Louis XVI was rapidly losing control of his country. As the threat of rebellion grew, the king relied on a specialized military unit, the Swiss Guards, an elite regiment of foreign mercenaries. Unlike local French troops and might sympathize with the hungry citizens, these soldiers were bound by strict military contracts. Their single mandate was the ultimate physical protection of the French royal household. By October of that year, angry mobs forced the royal family to flee the grand halls of Versailles and relocate to the Tuileries Palace, right in the center of a heavily agitated Paris. The king had placed an insular, foreign mercenary force directly between a furious, starving populace and the throne. The fuse was lit. This historical architectural diagram shows the sprawling layout of the Tuileries Palace. The guards had to secure this massive, wide-open perimeter when thousands of armed revolutionaries stormed the gates on August 10, 1792. As the mob breached Brahms, the king and his family abandoned the palace to seek shelter with the Legislative Assembly. They left their guards behind with no commanding officer and no clear orders. About 900 Swiss guards suddenly found themselves surrounded by a rapidly swelling militia of tens of thousands. To make matters worse, the defenders were critically low on ammunition. They were heavily outgunned and firing their final volleys. Gunsmoke and sparks choked the dark, ornate halls of the palace, as fierce close-quarters combat suddenly erupted everywhere. Through the chaos, the guards maintained strict military discipline. They held their defensive lines and refused to break formation, even as the walls closed in around them. This clash, remembered as the 10th of August insurrection, definitively broke whatever fragile power the French monarchy had left. The guards followed their duty to the letter, but fighting to protect a king who was no longer in the building turned a desperate defense into a massacre. In the middle of the carnage, a runner arrived with a handwritten note. It was a direct order from King Louis, instructing the Swiss to immediately cease fire and fall back to their barracks. The tragedy was entirely in the timing. The king had written the order a full 30 minutes after the firefight had begun. By the time the message crossed the chaotic gardens and reached the remaining officers, their defensive lines had completely collapsed. Retreat was impossible. This chart shows the grim results of that battle. An estimated 760 guards were killed in the fighting or dragged out and executed after surrendering. Very few survived. A 30-minute delay in a single piece of communication erased almost an entire regiment from existence. Decades later, the memory of that day weighed heavily on Karl Pfeiffer von Alteshofen, an officer of the Guard who had returned to his home in Lucerne. He outlived his men purely by chance. He happened to be on scheduled leave in Switzerland when the Tuileries fell.
Driven by guilt, he spent the years after the revolution painstakingly documenting the regiment's actions, determined to secure their place in history. To fund a physical tribute, he organized a massive public subscription, collecting donations heavily from the conservative royal families across Europe who still sympathized with the fallen French crown. By 1820, he had raised enough capital to commission the renowned Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen, tasking him with carving a massive memorial directly into a former sandstone quarry. Alteshofen channeled his immense grief into international diplomacy, turning the localized slaughter of his men into a monument funded and recognized by nations across the continent. A direct look at the carving reveals the grim details of the battle. The beast's pained expression and the broken spear lodged deep in its shoulder represent the mortal wounds suffered by the soldiers. Beneath its protective paw, the lion rests on a shield. Notice the fleur-de-lis pattern carved into the face. That is the distinct crest of the French monarchy, permanently linking the soldier's sacrifice to the Bourbon king. As soon as those symbols were chiseled into the rock, Swiss liberals erupted in anger. They saw the relief as brazen conservative propaganda, glorifying a counter-revolutionary military that died defending an absolute dictator. The political outrage was severe enough that local citizens mounted protests, with several agitators threatening to physically saw off the lion's stone paws. The Lion of Lucerne is a striking piece of art, but it also immortalizes a bitter political divide. It stands as a permanent scar of the French Revolution, carved by the severe complexities of absolute loyalty.